Hello everybody and welcome to this IWFM Navigating Turbulent Times webinar series event, 23rd in the series, Managing Flexible and Remote Teams, Lessons from 7 months of Lockdown. So far in this series we have explored different aspects of the COVID-19 pandemic's impacts on workplace and facilities management, as well as a variety of other key issues in the profession. And today, due to popular demand, we are discussing the management of remote teams. Now, while there continues to be much uncertainty, we can at least be certain of one thing, that remote working is here to stay for the foreseeable future, and perhaps much further into the future, now that many workers are benefiting from the experience, both personally and professionally. Today, our guests will be considering the issues of remote team management and the profession's responsibilities in this area. Next slide, please. So a little bit of context to start with. When COVID-19 lockdown measures were introduced in the UK, millions of workers were thrown into an unprecedented remote working experiment. And according to awareness figures from April, 46.6% of people in employment were doing some work from home, 86% doing so because of the coronavirus. Next slide, please. IWFM's own YouGov-powered research into remote workers' attitudes and experiences during the lockdown period has highlighted that 73% wanted more flexible working options in future, and 51% even felt that their home working experience had made working in a corporate office seem unnecessary. Next slide, please. But there are challenges. There are significant challenges, in fact. 51% of remote workers have found it hard to stay motivated and focused. 42% report distractions in the home, and 36% report having an inappropriate working environment, and that's particularly prevalent amongst young people. Beyond IWFM's own research, there are also growing concerns over mental and physical well-being. So how do you manage remote teams effectively in these ongoing challenging times? Let me introduce today's panel. Next slide, please. Today's panel includes Ian Baker, Head of Workplace at MCOR UK, Lisa Hamill, co-founder of Brave Goose, Claire Hollister, Director of Hollister Consulting, and Adrian Nash, Managing Director of Radius 360 Limited. Now, just before we get started, some housekeeping. We're here for around an hour, and I'm happy to put any questions that you might have to our panel, and that will be opened up very soon for you to be able to do so. So just follow the on-screen instructions there. And welcome to everybody. Let's look at a key aspect of this, which is the 4 component areas of the issue of remote team management. Adrian Nash, I'd like you to give a brief overview, please, of the aspects of leadership, risk, communication, and well-being. Next slide, please. And
thank you, Martin. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So I just want to have a quick scope of some of the concerns that lead us to work under these 4 headings today. It's not exhaustive, but things that we've been looking at here over recent months are interesting things, and that they're great challenges because necessity is the mother of invention, and I think we're going to discover some new ways of doing stuff, which is going to be pretty exciting. So things like, how do we balance relationships between people who are non-remote and people who are remote? How can we work on people's attitude and access to technology? A very interesting one, we've done some work with GHD, the hair people recently, looking into the effects of introversion and extroversion when people are working from their spare bedrooms, etc. Recalibrating our expectations of each other so that we're not unrealistic about our deliverables. As far as I'm aware, there's only been 1 randomized study of remote working. It was done in China and it was done in the tourist industry. And it shows very promising results. It was randomized in as much as half of the staff were sent home if their birthdays were on odd days of the month. The other half of staff whose birthdays were on even days of the month stayed in the office. And after 9 months, productivity went up by 13% to the home workers. Given an option to extend that time, it went up to 22% productivity, and in general terms, 2/3 of that was down to them putting more hours in their day, and 1/3 was down to working smartly. So going back to Martin's statistical analysis at the beginning, we are looking at the subject today through leadership, our capacity to influence others through skills, attitude, and knowledge, risk, understanding both the risks and the rewards of remote working, Effective communication, it's an old way of saying it, but getting the right information to the right people, crucially in the right way, and well-being, managing the holistic health of our non-office based team members.
Okay, so they're the 4 key principles, and shall we take each one at individually, please? So next slide. So leadership, I guess it's a question of best practice and worst case scenarios and a few other things. I obviously like to welcome to the conversation Ian, Claire and Lisa at this point. The first question, of course, what are the key principles of leadership in remote team management? Can we see the cameras, please, to see who's there? There you go. So Lisa, leadership, what's your perspective?
I think it's an interesting question, and I believe that traditionally, and probably a bit of a inherited method of leadership around the command and control, where it's kind of, you know, at an extreme, don't trust people. I think this is being really tested right now, and you know, measuring people by hours. I think, you know, we know over the last kind of 5 or so years, we've been looking to find different ways of working that has a more trust-driven element to our people. I like Adrian's mention of the introvert and extrovert. Hey, guess what? We're not all the same. There are different things that we, you know, that motivate us to perform. So I think now more than ever, I think it's the time to really put an element of trust in people, because a lot of people are working in this situation not through their own choice. You know, we've seen that tracking software has gone through the roof, which is quite startling, but is potentially looking to replace that. You know, unless I can see you, it means you're not working. So I would say, you know, the old thinking around not trusting people is not conducive to driving performance, whether you're a remote worker or not. And I would say that right now is the time that we really need to think more about actually what do individuals need to perform their best.
Okay, very interesting what you say there about the move to output management, and going back to Adrian's earlier point about introversion and extroversion. I guess there's a management component to that as well. It's about how leaders are as either introverts or extroverts. Adrian, was there anything on that in your research there?
Well, what we've done, and I hesitate to call it research because that's over-egging things, but in a survey of about 150 staff at GHD, who, like we do as a society, split down the middle, leaning towards introversion and extroversion. The thought was that it's playing the new way of working plays into the hands of introversion. And in actual fact, what we found is that it's fairly even-handed. People who are given over to introversion might at first have thought being at home is a bit more private, that kind of suits me. However, introverts have other characteristics like a predisposition not to rush things. And so because of that, they can kind of hide, they can fall off the radar more easily if they want to slow down decision making. And that whole kind of exposure thing and their profile can be diminished in the workplace. So it's not necessarily playing into their hands. And bless them, extroverts are using their moments on camera to do, you know, their 15 minutes of fame and do a few jazz hands and things. And so there are challenges on both sides that managers need to be acutely aware of, know who your people are, and know how to work with those two preferences. Sure. Okay, I just want to also add, just while we're on this one really quickly, people have been talking about situational leadership for years. Now is the time to practice it. Situational leadership.
Can you just add a little bit to that?
Yeah, it's like so many models. It's divided into 4 stages, from the initial do what I tell you right through to hey, get on with it, guys. And the situation that each individual finds themselves in and their willingness and their ability to move forward will predetermine how you as a manager look after them. It's not a one-size-fits-all. You've got to assess each individual and then use one of the 4 stages of situational leadership to manage those people and nurture them through to the point where you can, you know, hands off and empower them to perform at their best.
Okay, it sounds to me as if it's kind of the whole pandemic issue has sped up best practice in the area that possibly should have been more prevalent back then.
Yeah, it's great that something that was a bit theoretical for some people now is everyday practice. Well, it should be. Yeah.
Yeah. Ian, what's your perspective?
Yeah, hello, Martin. Yeah, I think it's a great question as well. I think that you know, over the past few months, we've all learned a lot of lessons in how this works. For me, it's understanding that it's not the same for everybody, and it's very easy for us in our industry to apply all of the knowledge that we've got into this. And I think we need to be mindful that other people that you know, aren't focusing on this as an aspect are just making it up as they go along and getting on with their day job. For us, it was interesting. Our executive leadership team actually put in a lot of time. They actually allocated just a huge amount of time at the very beginning of the pandemic, just to make sure that they understood what was going on and they could communicate really effectively amongst themselves. And there was even more time carved out in the operational teams to make sure that we all, you know, received that information as quickly and as accurately as possible. So yeah, I think it's interesting. There's obviously a lot of people out there that, although they're facing this situation, that they might not have realised that their leadership style is actually under threat or is changing. So yeah, it's great. It's interesting what Adrian said about the individuals and the extroverts. MCOR UK actually, we do insights discovery, which is a great thing to do, and you know, it often gets played back to me whether someone thinks I'm a green or a blue. Yeah, there we go. And I think that, you know, there's a big difference about that when you're working from home. You know, when you're with other people, I think some of those blue, green, yellow traits are far more easy to spot, and when you're on the other side of a screen, it can be very difficult. So.
And also, there's also the issue of teams are set as they were directly pre-pandemic, so those particular traits are known to people. As people come into teams, as remote working continues, you haven't physically met them. That makes it difficult to establish where they fit in that particular grid, right?
Yeah, is that for me? Yeah, I mean, I was chatting to a new starter of ours. Monday, joined the company 2 months ago, and I think he's been to the office once, and so he's been face to face with someone once, and you know, his entire experience of working for MCOR UK has been in his home. So you know, when you're looking at organizational culture and you know, how you belong to a tribe, and you associate peer relationships with work, and you haven't got that, it must be a very challenging thing. Luckily, I haven't had to do that, but yeah, I think he's coped quite well because we've got the technology within our business to actually have those face-to-face conversations, video-to-video conversations.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. And Claire, management mistrust staff to work productively. I think that's an established or has been an accepted a way of looking at things. Do you feel that that's changing now? Has pandemic helped?
Yes and no. I think over the last 10 years or so, as the move to more agile and remote working has come about, there has been an uncomfortableness with a lot of leaders in how they manage it, but they haven't had to deal with it because they don't push it forward. What's happened now is that obviously we have accelerated those trends massively. So the people that were uncomfortable with remote working are still uncomfortable with remote working, but they have no choice now. They have to do it. So yeah, a lot of leaders are perfectly comfortable with this and perfectly capable of making the change from in situation leadership to remote leadership. But I think there's an awful lot of people now that will be feeling a lot more exposed in their management and leadership ability because it's been kind of thrust upon them now without any time to get used to it, if you like.
Sure. Do you feel that this particular profession has it's a plus or minus in terms of leadership and its ability to adapt? I mean, obviously, famously, facilities managers and workplace managers collectively across the piece, talking to any number of different departments, necessarily having to engage perhaps with more people than maybe other departmental managers. Does that mean that they can adapt more routinely or more readily than other departments, other professionals? That's an open question.
I'll start. I think as you say, facility management, workspace management are pretty much used to change, because what we deal with all the time is change. So therefore, this is another change to deal with, and they're also much more dealing with the physical office. So there are changes with the physical office, but where remote working comes in, I guess we need to look at, do we use our workspace and our facilities teams to help provide the office environment, if you like, in people's homes? And that's quite a big jump, because a lot of people will not want the corporatization of their home. They're quite happy to have a workspace. So I think it's not in that area for facilities and workspace. I don't think it's a big jump. I think it's for the other leadership areas and the other management areas that the big jump will be.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I think at this stage we'll move on to point 2, which is risk. Next slide, please. There we go, risk management. These all say best practice and worst case scenarios. I guess it's worth considering both of those in our answers. Adrian, yes, so the question here, what are the risks that need to be managed? If we can start with you, and then we'll move through the panel.
Okay, so it's always cliches in this game. One of the risks is we don't know all the risks. Boom, boom. So yeah, disconnected employees, distracted employees. One of the things that we're trying to focus on a bit more right now is emotional intelligence, because of that whole self-regulation thing. Anybody wants to check this out, there's a lovely, you can see many YouTube clips on this, the Stanford experiment, where they give children marshmallows. And the children who can resist eating them get an extra one, and the children who can't don't get the extra one. If you track their progress throughout life, the classic hallmarks of success, status, income, job, all that kind of malarkey, the ones who could self-regulate were the ones who did really, really well. But the reason why we're pushing this is, unlike IQ, EQ, emotional intelligence, can be learned. You can raise your EQ. So we're hoping to help people with self-regulation to get over this distraction thing that's a real issue. And other risks, just the technology, even as we approach today's webinar, that there are inherent risks in the technology which we're going to have to acclimatize to and improve on. That's kind of my overture on this one, but I want to pass over to somebody else to talk about this one. Probably somebody.
Yes, Claire, I know you were. Sorry,
on this one.
Claire, I think you were particularly keen to chip in on this topic.
I think for me, the issue of managing remote teams, especially those teams that have moved from an office environment, a lot of the risks are to do with not being clear on expectations and not clarifying when you make those changes what is expected. So if staff move from an office base to a home base, if they move from rigid hours to more flexible, what else needs to change? What else do they or the business need to do to make that change successful? Because it's not just a case of, oh, I'm working from home now. There's a whole lot of other things to consider. When after the initial lockdown and everybody started talking about moving back to the office, every organisation had to do a COVID risk assessment to make sure that the office environment that they had, the workplace, was safe. And I think we should take a similar approach when we're looking at moving teams to work from home or remote or more flexible working. What does it actually mean, and what are the risks? And we should talk about the whole, working arrangements and the things that will cause distrust, discomfort, and effectively, ultimately, disengagement, which is the problem that Adrian was alluding to. So I think we need to talk about things like, what are the new protocols? When do you work and when you don't work? Without the daily commute to start and finish your day, how do you know you started and finished work? That's a risk for many reasons, and we'll come on to the wellbeing issues on that later. Who provides internet? Who pays for internet? Who provides a desk and chair? If I haven't got a desk and chair, will the company pay for it? These are little items, but they cause a huge amount of friction if you haven't thought about them first. And those are the risks of undermining this new working arrangement. And I think also the risk is when we talk about people working from home, we just assume that they're at home all the time. But we should think about, when do we want to bring them together? Do we still maintain some sort of central office? Do we maintain a corporate hub, even if it is a once a week we work Regis type approach? But do we still do that? Is that factored into the working arrangement? Is that to help to stop the risk of people feeling dissociated and disengaged? And the other thing, story somebody told me the other day, you need to think about people, what happens to their home arrangements? Can people now feel they can move away from the office? If we're not going to the office anymore, what happens then? Who pays the expenses if they need to go to the office? And I think that the story that someone told me the other day that shows the risk of dysphagia is somebody actually moved country whilst they were working from home and nobody knew. The company then had a massive tax exposure from somebody working in a different company, productively working. And nobody knew about it. There was no understanding of whether that was right or wrong, didn't feel the need to tell anybody. So clarity around those and an understanding of how we are going to work in this new way should help to mitigate a lot of the risks that we can see. But we do need to try and identify them, and they will be different. Every organisation will have some unique risks, and every organisation will have risks that are identical to everybody else. We just need to put some structure around it and think about it in exactly the same way as we did for the COVID assessments.
Sure. Okay. I mean, whilst on to the topic of risk, what do we think is the most significant risk at the moment? What is the one that could potentially cause the most concern to our particular audience? Is there a single thing that if a company hasn't dealt with it thus far, they need to look at straight away? That's an open question. Adrian.
Yeah, I'm not aware of there being, something at the top of the leaderboard on this one. Right. It's going to be down to individuals and the type of company they work for. But that doesn't mean that I've got the most up-to-date thinking, and I'll be happy if somebody else wants to step in and say, yes, the biggest risk is mental health or something. But I don't know that to be the case. And it's very, very easy in our line of work to start pontificating about things that aren't properly evidenced to research. It's a range of concerns, and I think we need to not lose sight of any of them. Sure. I think even little things like people not valuing their time anymore. We did a little bit of piece of research for the Bishop of Chelmsford many years ago. We had one of his vicars on a course, and they were moaning about being unproductive. And when we analysed it, the Church of England ministers were getting out of bed in the morning, put their slippers on at maybe 7:30, and they're a vicar at 7:30, and they're a vicar until they go to bed at 11 at night, never off duty. And so they never valued their time, because their shift was 7:30 in the morning to 11 at night. And it was only by changing their thinking about the fact that they needed to have breaks, they needed to have that distinction between work time, I don't know it's a vacation, but work time and non-work time, in order to value what they do, to get more things done and achieve more goals. And that was quite a few years ago. So, not valuing our time, and therefore, mission creep, not valuing ourselves, one of many concerns.
Yes, and of course, time connects into all the other issues that we will come on to in terms of well-being and indeed risk, because they're all interconnected. Absolutely. I think it's logical. Claire, sorry.
I was going to say the risk for me, again, one of the big ones is assuming that everyone will work from home. So if the business makes a decision to go for home working, that everybody A, wants to, and B, is able to. And we've all heard the stories of people, with balancing their laptop on their bed or on a wobbly kitchen table. A lot of people don't have a conducive work at home environment, and that should not be forced upon them without any option at all. And I think that's the way that we can disengage people and lose some good people, where we're not just thinking about them. We can't over-personalize this from an organization perspective. It's very difficult to look at each individual, but you have to consider the fact that people did not sign up to work from home, and whereas a lot of people will be happy to make that change, a lot of people won't. And how do we deal with that if working from home is a business solution?
Sure. Ian, I'm mindful of the fact that you've written recently about the potential for a solution between the home and the office being something more local than the distributed smaller offices. And I'm sure that's something we can come on to later on. But I think for now, if we just move on to the communication section, please, Lucy. Lucy, by the way, is our slide mover runner behind the scenes. Yes, so communication, Adrian, if you want to lead with that, the key elements of good communication for remote teams.
Are you working from home, Lucy?
Oh no, she can't hear us. But she can't.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm actually going to, the best practice, I'm going to pick up on what Ian has already introduced, the idea of profiling people to better understand not just their behavioral preference in the round, but communication preferences. Because if we can have, and it's not difficult, it's not a big ask. If as leaders and managers, we can have that conversation with each team member to say, okay, let's understand your communication preference, the style and the media that suit you, and then let's talk about the team's needs for information. What's the best that we can do to ensure that happens? It's a straightforward adult conversation. We're advocating people have one-to-ones if they can on a fortnightly basis or more frequently. So those discussions need to be had sooner rather than later, and to help the parties understand and to keep that thing that really lubricates the whole engine of business, communication. So I think that's really where I want to come in on that one. There's loads of ideas of best practice. I was talking to some people at GSK early this morning. What do they like about what's going on at the moment? They like the town hall talks. They like the CEO updating them. They love panel discussions like this to feel involved. They like the weekly team meeting, and they like the one-to-ones. That makes them feel connected and attached to the mothership. So I'll leave it at that and pass over to some of the others, if I may.
Yes, I wonder, Ian, with regard to MCOR UK, obviously you're dealing with any number of clients who are feeding back on their experiences and you're helping them out. Presumably you're seeing quite a few different forms of communication model. I mean, do you concur with Adrian about the kind of things that are working?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've going back onto our communication. We started the pandemic with some Skype, very loose use of Skype. Quickly moved into Teams, and now we're really fully embracing Teams. As a company, we look after quite a lot of critical organizations, so their security aspects mean that we can't always communicate as effectively as we now can with each other working remotely. So we can't often have video calls, for example. So this is great, and it's a fantastic replacement for a face-to-face meeting, but again, if you're having just voice calls with lots of people, it can be very difficult. So a challenge really. So yeah, it's wide ranging, but we just have to deal with that at the moment, really, until everybody gets to the level that they can have those video calls. And it's
okay, Lisa. This is where it'd be interesting to get your perspective as well as to what are the right kind of platforms. I suspect that's the best question for you. So if you'd like to explain a bit about you and yours.
I would say be flexible, and I think it's echoing what Ian and Adrian have said. I think it's about finding what works for the individual. The important thing is you're using something that's accessible by the person. Don't go all in for one thing. I worked for a company, we employed 27,000 people, and Twitter was seen to be the most effective way to get messages out there. Obviously, you have to be careful about what content you put on there, but actually it's about, hit as many of the different mediums as you can. We talk a lot about, we need to get better at communicating. We know what to say. It's just about making sure it's going out in enough formats that people, treat your employees a bit like consumers. We're used to kind of cherry picking how we take in information and just treat them the same, I think. So things like, Trello, Slack. Trello is a great way for teams to communicate and kind of keep up to date on projects without a lot of kind of managers feeling like they're checking in, which I think is something that maybe more junior managers are struggling with, that they feel like they're kind of watching their employees while they want to be seen to be, being more trusting with them. WhatsApp is awesome. And then you've got the more, traditional ways, emails and stuff like that. But actually, it's just be flexible, use multiple platforms, and kind of allow your employees to decide what works best for them.
It's funny you should mention that, because I was just about to ask, is it the employees from the ground up bringing these platforms to the fore, or how much of it is coming down from an edict from above? Is this much more, is the choice of the platforms that then become successful more of an organic thing involving the teams that are obviously going to use them?
That would be my approach.
Okay. And Claire, do you have a perspective on this whole issue of communication platforms, and I guess anything to do with replacing the one-to-one face-to-face stuff we can't just do at the moment?
I think there's two different ways of looking. There's sort of general company team communication, and I think platforms enable the communication. They don't make communication. We still have to work out, as Lisa said, the words that we're going to say. But the interesting one is going back to what Adrian said about knowing individuals and what type of person they are, because remembering, you know, a call from a manager just checking up to see how you are, and, you know, just a general chit chat, one person will perceive that as really nice. You know, they're thinking about me, this is a really nice warm and cuddly experience, and the other person will think, he's checking up on me, what have I done wrong, why is he calling me? And if you don't know the people that you're communicating with, you're going to hit those problems all the time. So I think it's no different than when you've got people in the office. You have very different people in the office, some of them that you'll have a casual coffee with on a regular basis, and others you will have to do something formally, otherwise they never talk to you. And it's about knowing those things, and that doesn't go away. We still need that knowledge of the people, both at the company and the individual level, to make communication successful.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's then move on to the next slide, please, Lucy. There you go, well-being. Very much the topic of the moment, and it's something that has developed over the course of the last 5 or 6 years to be a key component of workplace and facilities management delivery, but of course absolutely critical in this current state of pandemic. So Adrian, yes please, the perspective on well-being to start us off.
Yeah, thanks Martin. So forgive me for reading, I'm just going to go through a few bullet points to make sure I don't miss anything more than anything else. Probably something else is catching my eye more than that. So in terms of this this well-being thing, we're a small business, and I've struggled to find ways of delivering it to my office manager, for example, who is still working remotely since March. But the things that the textbook tell us, establishing, you know, encouraging people to establish those boundaries between personal time and professional time, and communicate, not just kind of making the intellectual case, but the emotional case, getting people to understand just how important that is, not just for their well-being, but for genuine performance issues as well. Setting a good example, you know, let your team members know the things that you do that give you health and fitness and balance and lunch breaks and vitality. Let them know that you do it, and because as their leader, they will then, not all of them, but some will then follow your example and say, if it's okay for them, it's kind of okay for me. I think this is relevant. You're gonna have to make it fit, but I was just thinking of something that Patrick Lencioni talks to us about dysfunctional teams, and this idea of putting the people before the numbers, because ultimately the numbers are downstream symptoms of how well we're dealing with our people issues. And so if we apply that in a kind of the bigger picture stuff, putting people before numbers, then we will attend to well-being and that whole kind of holistic health piece that's rising in importance every single month since it landed on the map a few years ago.
Interesting, Adrian, because you make a good point about, again, connects back to leadership, doesn't it? This idea that you can let your team know what it is that's key for you in terms of well-being, and that starts the conversation rather than assume that they're going to do their own thing anyway, and it's just a question of facilitating them. It's also a question of leading the way by being open about what you're comfortable with. So that's fairly unusual.
You can't lead others. You know?
Yeah. Claire, what's your perspective on that?
For me, with well-being, the problem is it's very individual. So, you know, one man's stress is another man's personal motivation. And because it's so individual, it's therefore very difficult for the organisation to provide something en masse that is going to be relevant to the individual. And a little sidetrack story, a few years ago, company I was working at, everybody was kind of working on laptops and out and about most of the time, but when they came into the office, there was often requests for keyboards and screens, etc., because the desks were all, you know, just free hot desks. So to help with this, we set up a couple of banks of desks with screens, choice of keyboards, choice of mouse. So if people wanted to come in, they could use these facilities, and they were there for them to help them. Okay. Didn't work. So we had people coming in and they refused to use them because they actually wanted to sit in a different location in the office. And even better, we had people sitting with their laptop at the desk, pushing all of the screens and the keyboards out of the way. They wanted to sit at that desk. So really didn't work very well, not effective, done for all the right reasons. But in terms of its applicability to well-being, the one size doesn't fit all. So here's a bank of desks, you can use it. No, it needs to be more individual than that. So we could have explained it better, what we were trying to achieve and what we're trying to do. We told people rather than engaging them. So there's an interesting one there. And the other thing is the takeaway that even though we did it for their own benefit, nobody cares because they wanted it for themselves. So for me, well-being is a real challenge because you want to do the right thing, but it has to be done at that individual level. So we can do general things like provide health support, etc. And we can do things like buddy systems and make sure we communicate, and all of those are nice things. But sometimes you wonder whether there is also an option of putting in some additional services that can provide that personalisation when somebody does get stressed. One person is motivated, but the other person gets stressed, and they can pick up the phone and talk to somebody who is more maybe appropriate than somebody else in the organisation. And there's lots of different services you can do. But I think trying to tee up that individualisation and the global or the holistic view of the organisation is something that we need to consider for these things. And I'd also not discount the face-to-face meetings, trying to make sure that we do bring people together at some time, because that is whatever we do in these wonderful Zoomy, Teamsy sort of times, meeting face-to-face is much richer. And I think you get a lot more out of that than you do about remote working. Even though I am a very big supporter of remote and flexible working, I do think we do need that central location to come together to keep us healthy, and having that option available for people. As we discussed before, some people don't want or can't do the home working, so keeping those other places for them to help their well-being is quite key.
Okay, thank you. Ian, now I know from an MCOR UK perspective, well-being has been a key focus within the organisation and outside to clients. Perhaps you can share some of the perspectives you've gained about how well-being needs to be delivered to remote teams.
Yeah, sure. And I'd be remiss not to plug our recent win at the IWFM Impact Awards, wouldn't I? In that category. So very happy we are too. Yeah, we just picking up on what Claire said. We focused on three elements: so physical, emotional, and financial well-being, and all of those categories had some real depth to the solutions of those. So just looking at the indoor environment that we ask people to work in when they're in the office, obviously, sleep, bike to work schemes, so exercise, and but also looked at the emotional well-being. So there's a very big mental health training program. We sponsored Mind last year, employee engagement initiatives, etc. And then financial as well. I think there's obviously something that's often overlooked. So there's increased financial support that our company can provide our employees. So if they get into debt, there's a better way of helping them get out of that debt through salary sacrifice and stuff like that. So it was very wide ranging. But for me, I think that out of everything we're going to discuss, well-being is the one topic that really needs to be the most authentic. You can't just throw some words at it and expect it to work. You really have to have the people firmly, as Adrian said, firmly at the forefront of your mind rather than the numbers at the end. So that's me. I think the interesting thing as well, though, is well-being for me, as part of the workplace. Well-being is an output of a good workplace to me. And when we're looking at how we can improve people's well-being, I think we also need to remind ourselves of why we come to the workplace in the first place. Too many places there, because we don't technically come in to earn money. We come in to work because we want to be motivated and we want to contribute and we want to have a purpose. And if you can get those things working within that organization, and you wake up in the morning and you know why you're going to head into work and you're excited about it, even if you're doing something that might not be the thing you wanted to do when you're an infant. You know, if you can get that purpose and that motivation, you'll put up with some things that might not be, you know, quite right, or other people might think might not provide you with the greatest of well-being. So I think it's mindful of looking at the whole holistic organisation, really.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Listen, whilst I'm on, just to say that we've had several questions in. Thank you very much to all of you who have sent questions in. If you're prevaricating, now's the time, because time is passing. I think logically, what I want to do at this stage is move on to the Q&A slide anyway, because I think we're going to come back to well-being as part of the various broader questions. So what? Actually, I'll go straight into questions supplied. I've noticed this is from Andrew Cahill, and hello Andrew. I've noticed in my organisation, particularly over the last week or so, that the mood of those in the office has dipped massively. It seemed to time with the new tier announcements from government, and this really sets it in that this new normal is going to last a while. What can any organisation do to improve morale and well-being when traditional methods such as socials, drinks, etc., are not possible for the foreseeable future? I think it's worth saying that, yes, of course, when this pandemic started, the evenings were getting lighter, and there was this sense of novelty. And it's probably reasonable to say that that's worn off now. And not only that, but it feels like we're going again, and it's getting darker in the evenings. So I wonder, does anyone have an answer to what can an organisation do to improve morale and well-being when traditional methods, socials, drinks, all those old school get-together things are no longer available? Who'd like to start?
Okay, I'll jump in if I may. I'm going to pick up on something I previously mentioned, or I thought I mentioned. I didn't mention it. Simon Sinek, who a lot of people are looking at the moment, the kind of the world's guru on leadership. He talks about a case study at a manufacturing plant in America where the shareholders and the majority of the senior leadership team told the CEO to lose staff, get rid of people, and that was to save the business and recover about 10% of lost productivity. And he went against them, and he introduced a scheme of I think it was an extra 4 weeks holiday unpaid, and you could barter, you could sell yours, you could do it on the basis that, and I quote, "It's better that we all suffer a little rather than a few people suffer a lot." And when they looked at what they'd achieved in that business, both motivation and productivity went up, even though they were having these extra 4 weeks holidays. So I would say that, and I'd also say was it Andrew? I'm a big fan of a piece of work by a guy called David McClelland. It talks about primary social motivation, and neatly we have just 3 different types of this primary social motivation. People are motivated by targets, goals, facts, figures, numbers. People are motivated by relationships and human contact, and people are motivated by control and influence. It's a very easy piece of material to get hold of, and if you can understand the people who are in your team, you will understand the lever that you need to pull to motivate them, over and above environmental concerns and other issues right now. Have a look at that, David McClelland, Primary Social Motives. It's a great piece of work to help motivate your team.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question that we have here, and I think this is an interesting one from the point of view of policy. Would the panel agree that there is a link between an organisation's culture and the maturity of their remote working policies? I guess it goes back to leadership and management, but does anyone have an answer on that one? An organisation's culture and the maturity of their remote working policies, is there a link?
Can I say yes and no? I think anything that an organisation does becomes its culture, either drives or influences its culture. Therefore, they can't be completely separate. But I think just to say that they are the thing that makes your culture is incorrect. The culture is so much more than any one aspect of an organisation. So I think, you know, we can say that they are important, but it doesn't create the culture in itself. You can have a fantastic office culture without any remote working. So there doesn't have to be a remote working policy to make that a successful culture, in my mind.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else on that particular topic?
I think it takes us back to slide 1, where we saw the words flexible working and agile working, and I think to try and differentiate those, the agile working is much more the product of a determined strategic attempt to establish a culture, like an innovation culture, where we can put ideas to work because people have the freedom to do what it takes to deliver on those ideas, and therefore they self-empower. That's great when it happens. Quite a few companies get it wrong because they tell people off when they try and self-empower, and that's different from flexible working, which is far more about the policies and procedures around circumstances of hours and such like. So I moved away from the question a bit, but I think yes, broadly speaking, yes, the culture can facilitate that if we know what we're doing.
Okay, thank you.
I'll jump in on that. I read a statement this morning actually that said the most successful people answer email the quickest, which is absolutely wrong in my opinion. So I hope everybody's going to nod along with that one. But obviously it was a statement on Twitter, and it actually got lots of people saying this is true and this is correct, and I've emailed these people and they get back to me very quickly. And obviously the issue is, now that we're working from home, like Claire picked up on it earlier, we're always on. People expect to send you an email or expect you to answer a Teams invitation for a call, immediately, because where else are you going to be? You're not going to be on the train into London, or you're not traveling somewhere. You should be at your laptop, and that will become more of a prevalent thing for organizations to look at and to address as part of their culture. Do we want people to be using the the tools that we've got where communication can be asynchronous, and make it synchronous, because it doesn't really work, and it doesn't allow us to do the things that we need to do to be successful. So it's I think it really does, and it's going to be something everybody should really focusing on about how they act to that.
It's very interesting.
Can I just add into that? So I think one of the things that's happened, if we think of a change in HR legislation, furlough is something that hit us. When has there been a change like that in recent times? And we're all sort of quite experts on it now and know more about it than we ever imagined we would. But actually, I think the organisations who have fared well are the ones who have taken some time to pause. And I know, Ian, at the beginning you said when the pandemic first hit, your leadership team took time to kind of understand what was going on. And I think having the courage to hold back, which is sometimes against, in the FM industry, we're used to problem solving, aren't we? We're very good at kind of executing, getting stuff done, making stuff happen. But actually having that self-control to actually pause on stuff right now, whilst it may be a bit counterintuitive, given everything's changing all the time, I think will be a good strength for people to have.
Interesting you should say that, Lisa. I was wondering about, you mentioned furlough, and of course we have the end of October deadline coming soon. I wonder whether that's going to be quite the eye-opener for people as they get to understand what the cost implications are at another level, and whether that might force more of an understanding or consideration of what their existing workers are doing. And that goes back also to Ian's point there about time management. This expectation that you will be there to go on a call, etc. People understanding certain other components of other people's jobs as they get into a new form of workflow. That's not so much a question as a statement, but I don't know whether anyone would agree with that we're still learning, and that furlough might see us, accelerate yet further.
Yeah.
Lisa,
yeah, I think so. And again, with the first wave, I think businesses started to get their head around a little bit about what that looked like. My sense is what's happening now is everything's getting a lot more serious. So maybe organisations who have been able to kind of see a bit of a road to recovery are now seeing that time looming. I think the new job scheme is a challenge, especially in the FM industry where we're kind of low margin, all of that stuff. So I think it will be, it's definitely going to be a challenging time for people, definitely.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Another question that's come in from Nicole Luke, and it's this: is there a way we can get to those spontaneous moments of idea generation or relationship building from non-formal social interactions from remote working? For example, in a physical space, there is a natural overlap where people from different departments might chat over coffee and spark ideas. With remote working, it can feel that, excuse me as I scroll, that social interactions are more formal and the conversation is usually fixed. In a room, many conversations may happen with different people, but online you are conscious of interrupting people and waiting your turn. It's a new etiquette, I guess, of communication between remote teams on such calls, almost like we're having now. And that issue of spontaneity, yes, we're losing that, aren't we? Is there a way around
that? I think it is difficult because Zoom and Teams and all those technologies, they don't really allow you to overshout each other, which is part of that idea generating thing that happens around the coffee machine with the different conversations. You can have breakout rooms, you can organize it, but it isn't the same. I've seen some organizations that have successful cocktail hours, and they'll have the pub time where people will join on a technology, and it will be a polite conversation in the pub, if you like, because people will talk one at a time rather than all together. And I think it does feel a little bit forced. I've been involved in some of those, and it's not the same as being around a table in a pub. It never will be, but it can be a bit more relaxed because there isn't an agenda. It is just people chatting, and hopefully over a drink as well. So it can be more relaxed. Maybe it'll come. Maybe make a bit more of a spontaneity.
that? This is the problem, isn't it? I mean,
spontaneous. Thank you. But I think that's the learning thing that we have to come to. It's another form of communication. I'm just hoping we can get back to a coffee machine or a pub with at least 6 of us together fairly shortly.
It's been at least 10 years since I was suggested the idea of a video wall. That was a huge, great video wall permanently on in an office, showing the London office on one side and the Hong Kong office on the other, and it would just shout across to say good morning to someone. That totally serendipitous connection with another office. Of course, we don't have that. It is very transactional, isn't it? At the moment, we have these meetings, we set times, we have bounces off each other. It is a very difficult thing to replicate. And it goes back to what you were saying, Claire, about trying to get as much face-to-face as you possibly can to get around the problem.
Yeah, hi Nicole. I think your question probably leads us down to a more philosophical level, and it takes me back to early conversations in sort of April time. And I was speaking with other training providers, and they were saying things like, how can we recreate the magic from the physical training room into the virtual world? How can we do this? And it became apparent that everybody was looking for some kind of substitute to the thing that we did before, to the thing we're going to do in the future. And thinking that it's almost like a binary approach. We had X, we now need Y, which does the same thing. And I think we need to be more challenging than that. Instead of looking to replicate what we had before, I think we need to look for entirely new things, and not sort of things that are pale substitutes or imitations. But I think we need to look completely new ways of operating and being, rather than the kind of the refabricated version of 2019. And I'm hoping that innovation is going to become flooding through anytime soon on all these areas that we've spoken about today.
Yes, I was going to ask, do you think that at the moment this isn't actually happening yet, and it's a bit of a holding pattern as people try and work out what the future is going to look like, or are people starting to bite the bullet and say we need to approach this in a completely different way?
There'll always be some, the legendary companies who break ahead of the others. The Googles of this world, and the funky companies with guys with beards, and they will probably lead the path again, I think, in this field. And it's so weird talking about this because, quote, nobody saw this coming. So let's not kid ourselves that something equally seismic doesn't happen in 2021. And so if we cut our cloth according to the world of COVID in the autumn of 2020, and that may not work in the autumn of 2021. Because again, everything's moved on, and there could be something equally, to do with the global warming or other issues, which then mean that all our best work to come up with best practice that everybody's craving for is not going to be used a great deal, because something else will nudge that out of the way.
I think also just harnessing your team again. So we can sit here and say, how can we recreate that? Well, let's ask the team, right? How can we? And kind of factoring in those creative opportunities to actually, you're the team, you're the workforce. How can we make this happen? How can we make this work for us? We've got a plethora of brains, different opinions, and all it takes is like a quick half an hour potentially, and you're adding in, right, let's do that. And we can change things, we can tweak things as we go along, but actually let's start asking better questions.
Lisa, do you think that's happening to some extent with some organisations already, i.e. there are people lower down the team asking those questions, and they're forcing the management to take that and do it on a wider basis?
Yeah, I think so. We run quite a lot of sessions around solving big complex issues for organisations, and we've just moved those online. So it is great when you're all in a room and you can be creative, but using some of these collaborative platforms, which, to be honest, before COVID, I didn't really know the power of them. But Teams is great. You can pop in all of your, Microsoft Planner, Stormboard. So actually, you can recreate those environments within those platforms, because life is going on. So we can't say, oh, how do we do that? It's like, how do we do that? Yeah,
2020 will be remembered for so many of these new names: Zoom, Teams, etc. It's a bit like the old VHS Betamax arguments of the past. Claire, sorry, I cut you off there. You were going to say.
I was just going to say we're talking about how things may change again going forward, and the various different technology solutions that we have that can help us, and they will get better. I mean, if you look at what we've got today versus what we had sort of 2, 3, 4 years ago, Teams, the Zoomy things, they're fantastic. They're really great. But I don't think we should forget the good old-fashioned telephone. Because I think one of the things we've said, communication is really important. And actually, if you've got a system where your managers and your senior managers are reaching out to people on that one-to-one basis, on a regular occurrence, just to have a chat and find out what things are going, and even take in some formal corporate messages if that's the case, I think that can't be forgotten. With all the fantastic stuff we can do, whizzy stuff with technology and that, don't forget the good old-fashioned telephone, even a landline. It doesn't even have to be a mobile. I think that, to me, picking up the phone and talking to somebody is so important.
It's one step further towards face-to-face than, say, the straight chat box text messaging type of thing that we so easily get into.
That's slightly richer, slightly more emotional engagement, I think, without anything breaking up.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question here. Well, actually, this is not so much of a question as it takes us back into the dim and distant past of about 12:10, where Kath Stanley asks, what was the name of the experiment, please? Sorry, Kath, I think this must have been the first question to come in, and we've gone on since then. I suspect Kath is asking about the experiment you were talking about earlier, Adrian.
So the marshmallow one.
Oh, the marshmallow one. Yes, the now it's gone out my flipping head. An American university, begins with N or M. If you Google the marshmallow experiment, you will get there. It's something like the Montgomery University, but it's not. That's not the name. But it'll come back to me after we've switched the cameras off.
Okay.
Oh, I had a whisper. The Stanford University experiment.
There you go. Okay. There you go.
Yeah. It's a great thing to watch. It's really insightful, and yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. We've had a couple of late questions in, so I'll go to those if that's all right. This one from Graham Nash. Should government acknowledge greater flexibility in our working practices by offering companies the means to provide their obligations to their employees at home, e.g. the health and safety matters, desk chair, lighting, etc., as well as the practical IT infrastructure and means of being able to work? Now, that's a very key FM question, of course, and obligations in that area are theoretically already in place. But yes, very good, important. Should there be more acknowledgement by government that things need to change there? I guess from an FM point of view, Lisa or Ian, that's probably in your area.
Yeah, I definitely think that there'll be some changes depending on whether organisations say that you can work from home going forward, or whether organisations will say you must work from home. And there is a pretty big subtle difference, actually. If at the moment we're saying offices are closed due to the coronavirus, you can work from home. It's borderline on must, and therefore whatever you had in your home office beforehand is kind of okay. If at some point in the future they'll revert to, we're going to close the office down, or we're going to reduce it, and you must work from home, either full time or set days. And yeah, I think there's an obligation to make sure that home environment is suitable and equal to your workplace, the office. So for sure.
Okay.
I don't know how they would actually improve it, but yeah.
Okay. Elisa, your perspective?
Yeah, I agree. I think the duty of care remains the same whether you're at home or at work. So yeah, that's my view.
Okay, so one final question I think before we cut off for today, and this from Karen Levitt. Given that most models, it's a leadership-based one, given that most models for leadership are based on in-person interaction and support, do you anticipate seeing new leadership models and expectations based on new ways of working that have been discussed today? Will leadership training begin to cover this topic as a standard aspect of leadership versus a crisis, versus the current crisis intervention? And do you have a sense of what that model might look like? I suspect, Adrian, that's for you.
Well, yeah, I would love that to happen. I mean, it's we're all on a learning curve at the moment, and as I said earlier, it's very easy to stick your neck out and start making predictions and shaping things. What I know this is a real kind of the get out clause, but it's the sort of thing I would like to think about and be able to send you an answer on that outside of the session, because it's such an important question. And if we can do that and sketch some thoughts out, I'll be delighted to do that. But I'm going to break the rule of a lifetime and not think with my mouth, because
perfectly fine.
It's exciting and too important.
Okay, that's perfectly understandable. I think that's it in terms of, oh, hang on, no, one more has come through. Bear with me a second. What is the best method of raising EQ? Again, I think, Adrian, you started with that earlier.
Okay. Very quickly, there's half a dozen models of emotional intelligence out there. I've mentioned Daniel Goleman already, so let's stick with his. So his is like an amalgam of the others. If you check him out online, he's flipping everywhere, and his model breaks down into 5 areas. And we can, if you want some very quick wins, I think make an effort to notice people to a greater depth than you ordinarily do. A really simple example of that is if you say good morning to all your team and they answer you and they say good morning, and then you say how are you today, and they all say I'm all right, and then one of them says I'm all right. You know that their tone of voice is telling you the opposite thing. So you notice that, and then you make an intervention and you offer them a cup of coffee later in the morning. It's noticing more stuff. It's about things like proxemics, where is your body in relation to mine in the room, and other such things. It's a joyful thing to involve yourself in, but yeah, and lean more towards the glass being half full. Hey, there's 2.
Interesting, because
to follow that up, I think what you've just said there is absolutely critical to how we make remote working successful. How do you take that good morning, and that noticing how people are? How do you do that when you don't see people in that office environment? How can you, as a team leader or a manager, recreate that? And I think that is our challenge, because that hits the well-being, it hits the communication, it hits all the risk issues we were saying. If we can find a way to do that bit, so going back to Karen's question about the leadership framework, how we can do that, I think, to me, is the challenge. That was one of the things I noted earlier, that we just have to work out a way to get right.
It's a very important issue, the intonation aspect, I think. You're quite right, Adrian. It's not just a question of the voice, it's also a question of perhaps misreading hastily tapped out emails and chat messages, and taking the wrong aspect of what's being communicated, and possibly feeling that there's a mood being communicated that isn't actually the case, and then you end up in a back and forth trying to sort that out as well. Okay, yeah. Well, thank you very much. We have come to 1:05, so we're coming towards the end here. I wonder if we didn't really rehearse this, but it might make sense to ask what the key aspects that people should be taking away from this conversation should be, and then I'll just close off. So if I could ask everybody in turn, and we may as well start with you, Adrian, what key aspect of remote management should people go away and think about straight away?
I'm going to go back to the effective communication thing, because I think this fits best there. And when we look at change in the workplace, the work of Kurt Levin often springs to mind. Those of you who've heard of him before, he's got this idea of freeze, unfreeze, refreeze. You know, imagine an ice cube in a square, you freeze it into water, and then you can refreeze it into the shape of a star or something. And at the moment, a lot of people are in that state of flux, which means that we need participative leadership. We need to understand that for people who benefited from the old ways of doing things, they're not going to be willing conscripts to the new way. We need to slow down our expectations and help people. We need to show empathy to help people through the state of flux, so that when we do get to the other side of whatever that's going to look like, we've shown good leadership skills. So check that out again. It's a participative leadership style as it relates to Kurt Levin's change model. It's not a bad thing for anybody who runs a team to be investing 10 minutes reading up in their lunch break tomorrow.
Nice thing to sign off with, thank you. Claire, yeah, one key aspect that organisations or individuals should be considering.
I'd say, touching on a couple of points we've just more recently covered, it's awareness and mindfulness, because there isn't a one size fits all in this for anybody. There are a lot of unique situations, and I think everybody, from the lowest of the low to the highest of the high, needs to have that different level of awareness and mindfulness to recognise people and the different circumstances that they're in.
Okay, thank you very much. Ian, same question to you, key takeaway.
Yeah, thank you. For me, I think, you know, I've spent quite a lot of time rallying against the millennial and the generational kind of aspects of looking at workplaces and focusing on certain generations. I think at the moment we're almost at a point where what I used to say is probably wrong, and that I would encourage people to actually look at their workforce and you know, realise that more than ever the generation that you're in means that the effectiveness of or how you're affected by this current situation is different. You know, specifically younger people, how working remotely is going to affect the communication with their peers, and how that will shape them growing into well-rounded people in the working environment. So I think you know, Adrian and Claire have kind of covered off pretty much the main stuff, but I just encourage people to look at their employees and focus on their generations and react accordingly.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you for that, Ian. And finally, Lisa, key takeaway, please.
I would say, you know, work on having genuine, meaningful connection with everyone who works for you. If that means taking some pause, flexing the way you naturally lead, just so you can get more out of them. And also, I think let's stop calling people remote workers. They're our team, they're our people. And actually, maybe there's a bit of a mindset that makes you feel, actually, I'm a remote, I'm on my own, I'm on, you know, so maybe there's a way that we can move away from that.
I love that. I think that's probably the perfect way to end this. Let's get rid of remote. Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Adrian, Claire, Ian, and Lisa. It's been a very interesting conversation, and thank you, everybody, for listening. So we now go on to the commercials at the end. Lucy, please, next slide. Do make sure that you visit the IWFM Insight Hub. There is a plethora of material on there, and you can connect through to plenty of things that we've been discussing today, plus a whole range of good practice guides. I encourage you to go to iwfm.org.uk/insight. Next slide. And yes, that includes the COVID-19 resource document, which is now growing ever more significantly, and that is a key link directly from the IWFM site. Excuse me. And the final slide, please. Please do get in touch with any of your questions or case studies, questions connected to today's. We'll endeavour to get those answered. Indeed, anything you can feed back into this whole conversation, we'd be interested to hear from you. And I think that's the last slide. Is that right, Lucy? Apart from that one, please do use computers and tablets. Thank you very much. I understand that next week's Turbulent Times webinar involves Kathy Hayward, and she's going to, I think it's the Design Museum. So that's going to be an interesting event next week. So we'll see you here for that. Thank you again, Adrian, Claire, Ian, and Lisa, and goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.